waking state, and feeling refreshed and with no ill effects, you will wake up. After about a minute the deep, long, sighing breath that had preceded the sleep was repeated. The young man's eyes opened. He stretched his arms over his head, yawned, rubbed his eyes, and sat up. The stenographer got up from her seat and came into the large room, where she sat at her typewriter, preparing to transcribe her notes. Leslie Casey stood by his son, waiting for him to get down off the couch. The patient stood up and stared at him, smiling awkwardly. Dr. Munsterberg sued. Denley surged up from his chair and walked into the small room. "What do you think of this man?" he said to the patient. "Well, he's described my condition and the way I feel better than I could possibly do it myself. Then, if I were you, Dr. Munsterberg was measuring his words carefully. If I were you, I would do exactly as he says. From what I have heard, and from the people I have talked with who claim his readings have helped them, I would say that some extraordinary benefits have come from these experiences." "Where did you hear of this man?" "I read about him in one of the Cincinnati papers. I wrote and asked for an appointment. Then I decided to come here for the reading." "You told, in your letters, of your condition?" "No, not a thing. I just said I wanted a reading." "Remarkable, remarkable." Dr. Munsterberg retreated, wittying himself. His eyes glazed. He stood lost in thought. The patient turned to the young man on the couch and offered his hand. "Thank you very much," he said. "I don't know how to there is a river express my appreciation, but I'm going to follow all of your suggestions." The young man shook hands and laughed. "That's the best way to make me happy," he said. "If this thing works, we want to know about it. If it doesn't work, we want to know about it, even more so, because if it's a fake, we want to stop doing it. Dr. Ketchum will explain how everything is to be done," Leslie Casey said. He led the patient into the large room. Dr. Munsterberg watched the young man tie his shoelaces. When the bows were knotted, he said, "Young man, I would like to know more about this. I have never encountered anything quite like it. I would hesitate to pass any opinion without a long and thorough examination. But if it is a trick, I am convinced you are not yourself aware of it. If it is a trick, Doctor, I would like to know about it before I go too far and cause some harm," the young man said. "I do not think it will cause harm," the doctor said. "But," he glanced toward the large room, "I believe you are mixed up with the wrong crowd. This thing should not have a material aspect to it." Quickly he thrust out his hand, seized the young man's hand and shook it. "Well, I must be going," he said. "Keep your feet on the ground. Someday you may find yourself. However, if you never accomplish anything more than you did in the Dietrich case, you will not have lived in vain. I must go now." The young man escorted him from the office. At the stair-head they parted. The doctor expressed a regret. "It is too bad we could not know more about the so-called powers of your grandfather," he said. "It would be there is a river. Interesting to know whether heredity is a possible source for this thing." The young man watched him until he reached the street, then went into the photographic studio. In the great, bare room, with its prop chairs and backdrops stacked in a comma, Mrs. Doolittle was waiting for him with her small son. "It's his 4th birthday," she explained. "I thought it would be nice if we had a picture taken together." "Sure," the young man said. "Jim will be tickled. And this is Danny, I reckon." "I'm Daniel Doolittle," the boy said solemnly. His mother laughed. "He won't have the nickname," she said. The young man posed them with Daniel standing beside his mother while she sat sidewise, looking over the back of a light, low parlor chair. "You're too big to sit in your mother's lap, aren't you?" he said to the boy. "A gentleman should always stand," Daniel said coldly. The doctor's last words clung to the young man as he arranged the camera and inserted a plate. "The so-called powers of your grandfather." Had his grandfather really possessed psychic powers? Had he inherited his ability from old Thomas Jefferson Casey, the tall, kindly man with a beard? His grandmother always told him there was nothing wrong with strange powers so long as they were used in God's work. She must have known about her husband's abilities, if he had them. Only once had she mentioned the subject. "'Tfor grandfather could do tine things. But he always said they came from the Lord and were not his to be showing off and misusing." But what were they? Certainly his grandfather could not have given There Is a River readings, or he would have done so. He always wanted to help people. It was hard to remember him. There was the memory of going to the big house and sleeping with grandfather and grandmother, and waking up at night and feeling with his hands for their faces, to find which was which. If there was a beard, it was grandfather. There was the memory of riding behind him on his horse, of listening to him call to the men in the tobacco fields, of hearing him ask the blessing at Simday dinner. There was that sunny, hot day in June, 1881. The 8th of June. The young man sighted through the camera. He saw Daniel's proud, unsmiling face, with its upturned nose and freckles. He was just for himself on that Jime day. "Quiet now. Watch my hand. Be still," he said. He was just Daniel's age, and they were riding across the big field, heading for the BAMs. He pressed the bulb. The shutter clicked. Hay were riding across the big field, heading for the BAMs. The men were in the machinery house, repairing a binder, and Grandpa wanted to see how the work was coming. When they came to the pond that sat between the road and the BAMs, the horse stopped. "Better get down, old man," Grandpa said. "I'm going to give this fellow a drink." He slid down and ran into the tall grass by the water, glad of the chance to get himself cooled off. It was hot up there on the horse, with Grandpa cutting off the breeze and the sun coming down on his bare head. His pants were wet from the lather of the horse and his hands were sweaty from holding Grandpa's belt. He squatted by the edge of the pond and stared into the water, looking for fish. Grandpa walked the horse into the pond and waited, while he drank, sitting in the saddle with his hands on his hips. Suddenly the horse threw up its head, reared, and plummed into deep water. Grandpa held his seat and grabbed the reins, pulling on them with all his strength. "There is a river." The horse swam to the other side of the pond, galloped to the white rail fence surrounding the BAMs, tried to jump. It failed and turned back to the pond. Somehow Grandpa retained his seat. As the horse entered the water a second time, he stumbled and went to his knees. Grandpa was thrown over his head, landing on his back. The horse got to his feet, reared again, and brought his forefeet down on Grandpa's chest. Then he turned and ran off through the field. Grandpa's head was under the water. Old Man waited for him to get up. He called to him. There was no answer. Grandpa lay still. Old Man ran to get help as fast as he could. Grandpa was dead. They carried him to the house, and Dr. Kenner came, but Old Man could hear his grandmother crying. And he knew it by the funny look on the faces of his uncles as they came out of the room. He sat in the kitchen and talked to Patsy Casey about it. "Grandpa's dead," he said. "The horse killed him. Now, will they put him in the ground and bury him? He'll go to the angels." "Old Man," Patsy said. "Mr. T.J. was a fine gentleman, and he'll go to the angels. Will I see him again?" Old Man asked. Patsy bent down and peered at him. "Sure you'll see him again," she said. "Yo has the seond sight, ain't yo?" He didn't know what she meant by that. Suddenly he wanted his mother. "I want to go home," he said. "I'll take yo," Patsy said. She took his hand and went with him down to the road and across it to the HTTLE farmhouse where Clyde had been, having since his father gave up keeping the store at the cross roads. He told his mother what had happened, and she sat there as a river for a long time and told him how death was just going back to heaven, and living down here was just being away from the angels for a while. "But grandfather was my friend," he said. "The angels should have known that. I needed him to take me riding, and he was going to teach me to fish and hunt. Perhaps he will, even if he is an angel," his mother said. She took him back to the big house the next day, and he saw them come for the funeral, in their carriages. He saw all his uncles, Edgar, Clinton, Matthew, Robert E. Lee, Lucian, and Delbert Casey. His granduncles were there too, George Washington, James Madison, and Franklin Pierce. Casey. His Aunt Ella Casey Jones was there, and his other uncles, Tyre Majors. There were more aunts, too, from the other major farms and the other Casey farms. He couldn't remember all their names, and they all looked the same when they were dressed up anyhow. He stayed at the house with Patsy when they took Grandpa and went away for the funeral. Standing by the window, watching the carriages disappear down the road, he could smell the apple blossoms and hear the bees rushing to their hives. It was a lonesome day. He walked home by himself and went to play under the maple trees in front of the house, where his playmates came to meet him when it was too hot to play in the backyard. They were nice little boys and girls, and he had wondered for a long time why other people didn't see them. But one day he found out that Clyde didn't like other people to see them. His father came to ask to whom he was speaking, and when he turned around to point out his three tnates, they were gone. They came back after his father left. But his mother could see them sometimes, and it made there is a river. Liam happy. One day she looked through the window and said, "Your playmates are waiting for you," and when he went out, there they were, sliding down the hayrick. It was a beautiful land in which to live. He loved the rolling red and black fields that turned green with crops in the summer, and the patches of forest that were haunted by shy animals and filled with pleasant sounds. He liked the big houses and the clusters of bams that dotted the landscape. As far as his eyes could see, he could go to any one of the groups of bams and find some of his TMCLER or cousins' work and talk to them about fishing and hunting, about tobacco leaf, and about the weather. There was always something doing in the bams, especially in autumn, when the tobacco was being fired. Great logs were rolled together and kept burning slowly, while the smoke rose to the eaves, where the tobacco hung. He liked to sit and become filled with the odor. He liked the smoke house, too, where a smudge fire of hickory and sassafras chips sent incense drifting up to the bacon, the sausage, and the shoulders of ham. In winter there were all sorts of chores to do among the long rows of stalls, in the harness room, among the nests of machinery, and in the room where seed was kept and prepared for spring. By March the sun was lingering, and the earth turned wet and soft. The brooks became loud and filled their eddies with green scum. Walking along their edges he found crack uses lifting their heads. Shoots of jonquils pushed open the long rows of the gardens. Soon there was planting, and in May and June the tobacco was put in. By then the woods were a fairyland, full of dog there is a river. Wood and redbud, hickory and red and white oak trees, hazelnut bushes, violets and ack in the pulpits, skunk cab, beige, pawpaws, and May apples, the litti plant that is the mandrake of the Bible, with a blossom in May and a fruit that is ready to eat in late June and early July. There were quail and rabbits, which he learned to hunt, as he grew older, with an ancient muzzle-loader. His equipment was a powder horn, a shot flask with caps, and a news paper for wadding. Sometimes the newspaper was not tightly packed, and would stream out when the gun went off, catching fire and making a wonderful sight. There were plenty of fish, too, both in the brooks and in the ponds. In summer fishing was his greatest joy. Then the days were long and hot and the men worked in the fields. The women stayed indoors, canning fruits and vegetables. And he had no playmates but his sisters. A new one was being born all the time, it seemed to him. Till there were 4 of them, Annie, Mary, Ola, and Sarah. From them and their does he was glad to get away for long hours beside the water, dreaming as he waited for a fish to come and take the worm he offered. His little play folk came to him there, to be with him. They were always his size. As he grew older, they grew older. What he wanted to do was always what they wanted to do. Sometimes there were only a few of them, sometimes there were many. One day they would be all boys, another day they would be all girls. They went away when another person came, unless it was Litta Anna C. She was a neighbor's daughter, and just his age. The playfolk seemed to like her, and she could see them and even talk with them. She was inquisitive. One day when it rained and they all ran to the playhouse they had built in the top of one of the bams, she asked the playfolk why they didn't get wet. "There is a river," one of them said. "Oh, we can't get wet. We live in flowers, and the music." "What music?" Anna asked. "The music of everything," the little fellow said. Once he and Anna waded out to an island in the creek, at the back of her father's farm, and there, at the water's edge, they found other little folk. But these would have nothing to do with them. They said they had never been girls or boys, and would rather play with the dragonflies. He wondered if the playfolk would ever come back after the cold winter in which Anna and her father both died of pneumonia. He thought that either they would go away with her, or she would come to him with them. When spring came and he went to the woods, they were there, but she was not with them. As he played with them, he suddenly realized that they had stopped growing, that they were no longer keeping pace with him. He knew then that he was going to lose them. He could barely remember the time when he had not known them. He had made a httle house under the butter, been vines in the garden, and one day a boy came to play with him. He told his mother about him, but she had not seen him. The next day the boy came back and brought some others with him. It was after that, one day, that his mother saw them. He dreaded the day when they would not come to meet him, but when it arrived he found that he didn't mind. He listened more intently to the calls of the birds and to the other sounds of the woods, until the having things aroxamed him took the place of his invisible friends. The loneliness he had been afraid of never came. After a while his father began to run the store at the crossroads again. There he sat quiet among the barrels and boxes and listened to the men talk of politics and tobacco. There is a river, and the women discuss styles and the prices of things. He cared to listen to the grown-ups talk, while they bought yards of cloth, barrels of flour, sacks of rice, herbs, tea, medicine, everything they did not raise or make on their farms. With every $'s worth of goods they were entitled to a drink from the whiskey barrel, which stood in a cummer with a dipper hanging above it. The men paid the bills and collected the premiums. Next to his mother, his grandmother was his best friend. His father was nice, but he didn't have time for a small boy. He was always smoking a cigar, pulling on his mustache, and talking to the men about politics. He was justice of the peace now, and everyone called him Squire. Grandmother was always alone, or just fussing around the kitchen with Patsy. Casey, she had lots of time to talk, and she liked him to tell her about seeing Grandpa. He saw Grandpa sometimes in dye bams, usually when the tobacco was being thread. He never told anyone but Grandmother. It was a secret between them. Of course Grandpa wasn't really there. He was like the little playmates. You could see through him if you looked real hard. He found Tliat people meant things to talk about. Grandmother meant talking about Grandpa and about the farm, and about what he would do when he grew up. Patsy Casey meant talking about good things to eat and about how fat he was getting, except that he wasn't. He was nearly skinny. His father meant taking about growing up and being a big fellow and going to school. and whether he had done his chores. Talking to his sisters meant listening to them tell about Clya dolls, and what they did that day, and what they were going to do tomorrow. His mother was the only one who didn't mean certain things. They just talked about everything and anything, and that was why he liked her. Best of all, she never laughed at him or teased him, so there is a river never was afraid to tell her what he thought. She never needed to scold him, because he knew that she didn't like to, so he always did what she asked, and even more. It was nice to be with her and do things for her. She was a good friend. He was 7 before he went to school. That year his aunt, Mrs. Ella Casey Jones, had a boarder named Mrs. Ellison, who had come from the West, where she had been a Mormon, and, so she said, one of Cly's wives of Brigham Young. She had also been a school teacher. And the parents of the neighborhood asked her to conduct a class for the smaller children. Mrs. Jones provided a room in her house, and Squire Casey brought his son and several daughters to the class. Mrs. Ellison was a pretty, soft-spoken brunette. She was gentle with the children, and they loved her. The squire's son learned things quickly in her class, because he wanted to please her. "I know my lesson," he would say, and she would bend down to question him. Then he could smell the sachet she wore, and sometimes her hair would brush against his cheek, as she looked over his shoulder and listened to his answers. But Mrs. Ellison went away when spring came, and in the fall they sent him to the subscription school, by the cross roads near Liberty Church. He was frightened the first day. The desk was too small for his long legs. He didn't know any of the lessons they talked about. And when the teacher spoke to him, all the children watched him, and he got his feet tangled into the desk and couldn't stand up. He didn't like school. Every time the teacher called on him, he was thinking about something else, and didn't know the answer to the question. "Don't you ever stop dreaming?" Josie Turner, his first teacher, would say. There is a river. He tried to keep his mind on the lesson, but it was no use. While one of the other children was reciting, he woxiled look out the window, toward the woods, or his grandmother's, and away his thoughts would go. Grandmother was building a new house. There had been a big fire the year before, and the old house had burned to the ground. Now the new one was nearly finished. And while the work was going on, Squire Casey decided to put up a place of his own. He picked a spot just at the edge of the woods that stood between the bams of the big house and the road. It was a pretty place, and when the cottage that he and his brothers built was finished, everyone called it the little house in the woods. "Old man, will you read the next sentence?" Josie Toomer would say. But he would be staring out the window, dreaming of his new home, and Cly Brook that ran through the woods, and would not know the right place in the book. When Dr. Doolin married Josie Turner and she left the school, he had to do better, because his father took over the teaching job. His father was a STEM man with a quick temper. He struck first and asked questions afterward. But still he dreamed and didn't know the lessons, until his knuckles had no skin on them for being rapped so often. It was different when they took him to church. He was 10. The first time he went to services at Old Liberty. He liked the story the preacher read from a book and wanted to know all about it. When they got home, his mother gave him her Bible, and he read it all time afternoon, until she took it from him. "You'll bum your eyes out," she said. "I'll get you a Bible of your own, next time I go to town. There is a river," his father said. He was proud of his son at last. "I'm glad you like the Bible. It's the greatest book in the world." Next Sunday at services, the preacher said the church needed a sexton. "What is a sexton?" he asked his mother. "He's the one who takes care of the building and cleans it up," she answered. "I'll do it," he said. "I'll be the sexton." It was a small building, and the work was not hard. He swept the floors, dusted the pews, and fixed the pulpit for the preacher. His father brought him a Bible from town. Mr. Hopper, the owner of the bookstore, had refused to take any money for it when he learned it was for a 10-year-old boy who had asked for it himself. "Every boy should have a Bible," he told the squire, "and when a boy asks for it, it's a privilege to give it to him." He wrote the date on the flyleaf, January 14th, 1887, and began reading. By the end of June he had gone through the entire book. That summer the Reverend John T. Hawkins held a series of meetings at Old Liberty and stayed at the Big Casey house. Sitting by his grandmother's side, the new sexton heard his first theological discussions. He asked questions himself, and when Mr. Hawkins had gone he began to interrogate any preacher who came along. Whenever the officers of Old Liberty got together he was there, and it was he who usually started them discussing the Bible. He asked all of them questions. His granduncles George Washington and Franklin Pierce Casey, his cousin Isaac H. Casey, Daniel Owsley, his uncle by marriage, Ed Jones, and any others who would listen and give him answers. Once he had them started, he withdrew and listened to the arguments and opinions. Sometimes the men talked about things he did not under there is a river stand at all. The congregation of Old Liberty belonged to the Christian Church, a sect of the Presbyterian Church. A branch of it had been founded in North Carolina by Barton W. Stone, and another branch had been founded in Pennsylvania by Alexander Campbell. It was in Old Liberty that these two men met for the first time. The Christian Church practiced open communion and held the service every Sunday. It was when they talked about this and about him singing and Stone's opinions and Campbell's opinions that he was puzzled. Then he would quietly move away, open his Bible to a favorite passage, and live in the strength of Samson or David, or help heal the sick and tie a lame with Jesus. One day he conceived a great ambition. Often one of the men would say, "Well, I've read the Bible through a dozen times, and it seems to me." Or another would say, "As often as I've read the Bible through, it never seemed to me that." He wanted to be able to read the Bible through many times. It would be nice if he could say that he had read the Bible, well, say, once for every year of his life. He had heard one of the men say, "I read the Bible through every year," and that gave him the idea. He would read as fast as he could until he had come even with his years. And after that he would have to read it only once a year to keep his record. As soon as the idea entered his head, he turned to Genesis and began the task. From then on he never went any place without his Bible, though he generally managed to conceal it so people didn't know he had it with him. He read at every possible moment, giving only the time that was absolutely necessary to his chores, and paying almost no attention to his schoolwork, since his father was no longer T08 CLI0R. When spring came he went to the woods behind his there is a river home and built a retreat for himself. It was a lean-to, of saplings, fir branches, moss, bark, and reeds from the edge of the brook, and it stood by the willows, where the stream took a bend. The water always looked so inviting that he dug himself a well to act as a filter. There, with the sun shining on him, he sprawled through the long spring and summer afternoons, reading as if possessed. When autumn faded and he had to go indoors, he huddled by the kitchen stove, undisturbed by his mother, who looked over his shoulder now and then to see what chapter he was reading and to whisper something about it that helped him to understand the words. Again and again he went through the books and chapters until the pages were as familiar to him as the pictures on the walls of the having room. Each time he waited from day to day with rising excitement for the great climax, the last chapter of Malachi, the end of the Old Testament, when the coming of the Lord was prophesied. For, behold, the day cometh, that shall bum as an oven, and the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly, shall be stubble, and the day that cometh shall bum them up, saith the Lord of hosts, that it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and ye shall go forth, and grow up as calves of the stall. Just 4 more verses, after that, and he could turn the page and find the New Testament of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Then came the first chapter of Matthew, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Then he was happy, because Jesus triumphed over evil, and healed the sick and the blind, and raised the dead. Even there is a river. When they crucified him, he rose from the dead, and went to live with his Father in heaven. And in St. John he told his disciples how they could also go to heaven, and how all people could go there if they obeyed the law of loving God and each other. When it was all over and the fiery book of Revelation was finished, he would rush back to the beginning to be again with his heroes of the wilderness, Babylon, Egypt, and the Promised Land. Cain killed Abel, Noah built the ark, Hannah bore Samuel, Lot's wife was turned to a pillar of salt. On and on marched the heroes and the villains, the wicked and the mighty. So quickly did he read that, by his own count, he had been from Adam to John a dozen tunes by the spring of his 13th year. As soon as the weather was good he went back to his retreat in the woods. There, one afternoon in May, as he sat at the entrance of the lean-to, reading the story of Manoah, he became aware of the presence of someone else. He looked up. A woman was standing before him. At first he thought she was his mother, come to bring him home for the chores. The sun was bright and his eyes did not see well after staring at the book. But when she spoke he knew it was someone he did not know. Her voice was soft and very clear. It reminded him of music. "Your prayers have been heard," she said. "Tell me what you would like most of all, so that I may give it to you." Then he saw that there was something on her back, something that made shadows behind her that were shaped like wings. He was frightened. She smiled at him, waiting. He was afraid his voice would not make a sound, the way it did in dreams. He opened his mouth and heard himself saying, "There is a river. Most of all I would like to be helpful to others, and especially to children when they are sick." He was thinking of Jesus and the disciples. He wanted to be like a disciple. Suddenly she was no longer there. He looked at the place where she had stood, trying to see her in the beams of light, but she was gone. He took his Bible and ran home, anxious to tell his mother about it. He found her in the kitchen, alone. She sat down at the table and listened to him. When he finished, he was suddenly ashamed. "Do you think I've been reading the Bible too much?" he said. "It makes some people go crazy, doesn't it?" She reached over and took the book from his hands. Turning its pages to the Gospel of St. John, she read to him. "Verily, verily, I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall ask the Father in my name, he will give it you. Hitherto have ye asked nothing in my name. Ask, and ye shall receive, that your joy may be full you." She looked at him and smiled. "You're a good boy, you want to help others. Why shouldn't your prayers be heard?" she said. "I don't think you need to stop reading the Bible. I'll know if something is going wrong with you. But we had better not tell anyone about this." "No, I just wanted to tell you, so I'd know what to think." "But what does it mean?" he asked. She got up and went to where he was sitting, and put her arms around him. "It might mean that you're going to be a doctor, perhaps. A very famous one, who will have great success with children," she said. "It might mean that you're going to be a preacher, or a missionary. Sometimes, you know, men study medicine and then go out as missionaries, so they carry the there is a river word of God and help the sick in heathen lands at the same time. That's what I'd like to be, a missionary," he said. "Well, let's get a start by cleaning the milk pails," she said. "Cleanliness is next to godliness." That night he slept very little. The next day he was more than ordinarily dull and HSDS in school. The teacher, his Uncle Lucian, asked him to spell cabin. He couldn't do it. Uncle Lucian was irritated. "Stay after school and write it 500 times on the blackboard," he said. It took a long time to write the word so many times. He was late getting home. There was no time to go to the woods. He had to hurry to get the afternoon chores finished before the supper chores were ready. Squire Casey was furious when he came in. The family was disgraced, he said. Uncle Lucian had told him what a stupid son he had. All during supper the squire talked about it. After supper he took the spelling book and the boy and went into the parlor. You're going to start learning your lessons or I'll know. The reason why, he said. Sit down here now, and get to business.